the correct decision in any way.
Well, maybe not.
And that's Leclerc's decision that he's made, you're saying?
But I don't know. But maybe by then the lap on the slicks wouldn't have worked either. So I'm not sure it worked out. Anyway, I think the whole team between them, it all fell apart, didn't they? I mean, he admitted, Leclerc, that he accepted the engineer's decision to put the car on inters at the start, which I don't understand why they did that.
Well, so Laurent Mekies, the racing director.
I listened to this interview, yeah.
Yeah. So he said we ignored the golden rule of. I'm sorry. I'm actually trying not to laugh. I didn't mean to laugh. He said we ignored the golden rule of being on dry tires on a dry track, which is, you know what? That is a golden rule.
When you put it like that,
yeah,
it's quite. I don't know.
But his theory or the defense was that they were split strategies, so you know it would work, and one of them is always going to be happy, one of them was always going to be sad. But there's a difference between splitting your strategies where someone starts on the softs and someone starts on the mediums, and splitting your strategies with everyone else doing something different, and also knowing you are absolutely ruining one of your guys qualifying.
And they did it with the wrong guy, is the point, because Sainz has a 5-place grid penalty, so the guy they want to play safe with is the guy who's going to qualify at the front.
Yeah.
And start at the front.
No. Safe was slicks.
Exactly, and they didn't put Leclerc on slicks, so they should have gone safe with Leclerc. If they want to gamble with Sainz.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. But then there was no point gambling with Sainz, because if he got pole, then he wouldn't get pole anyway, because he'd have a grid penalty.
No, he would, because it's a pole for the sprint.
Oh yeah, good point.
And the grid penalties for the Grand Prix, so they messed up that aspect of it as well.
But the other thing is, you know, when you talk about splitting strategies, you're kind of in the situation where that makes sense in a situation where it's kind of 50-50. But when you look at the rest of the grid, it clearly wasn't a 50-50 decision, because they were the only ones that did it. So, you know, you have to be aware of what the rest of your competition is doing, and you have to find that balance of not, you know, just staring at the rest of the pit lane and thinking, oh, we have to copy them. But, you know, when everyone else is doing one thing, that is a big, big sign that, you know, the safe thing, as you say, is to take the slick.
And I think, like I say, there's that split of 50-50. Maybe one starts on softs, one starts on mediums, not a huge difference between them. But if you split the strategies in a situation, they knew yesterday when they sent the drivers out of the garage, one of them, they didn't know which, admittedly, but one of them was stuffed. One of them would have been absolutely stuffed.
Which seems an odd way to approach your race weekend,
right,
doesn't it?
Doesn't it?
Because it's different as well to a race situation, isn't it? Where if you put one on slick, one on inter, maybe at the end of, let's say, a stint, it all kind of equals out, and there's a bit of margin and time for things to equalize. That's just not the case in the session where, like we said, it's going to be that first lap. You have one shot at this potentially. But anyway,
it was quite something, and 57 for those of you syncing up. 57 minutes and 15, 14, 13. 12 seconds to go. Logan Sargent is out on circuit in this session in the Williams, getting in some mileage to try and get his required license points to enter Formula One next year with the Williams team. So that's why he's doing this second free practice session. We're expecting a lot of long runs, but with different fuel levels and different tires. So we'll try and keep track of it if possible, but it might be a little bit difficult in all honesty.
Could be a lot going on, yeah.
Yeah. Because we see some teams starting and doing a sort of sprint race run. Some do a race run, and then some are doing it on a Grand Prix race run, exactly. And then some are doing it on the softs, some are doing it on the mediums. Perez has done an install lap on the hards, but broadly speaking, we'll see if anyone does that. And I guess it's going to be the classic question of, will the softs last the sprint?
On this topic, by the way, this session, which is from a spectator point of view, obviously it's only a practice session, so spectators aren't the main concern. But this session was kind of, I get the impression it was kind of cobbled together. It was like, well, the teams want to get some running in, so they gave them this practice session.
Television spectators specifically.
Yeah, even though they knew that it wasn't going to really be something to watch. But what it has done is it's raised loads of questions in Formula One about the sprint format and what to do about it, because everybody recognises this session is a bit of a waste of time, pretty much for everyone. It reminds me a little bit of the fuel burning of that used to happen in qualifying in the mid-2000s, which, by the way, features in 2007, which there's a big BBC podcast being launched about on Thursday this coming week. Anyway, Gunther Steiner was talking in the press conference this morning, the Haas team principal. He said one of his ideas is to turn this into the qualifying session for the sprint, because they're talking about making the sprint a standalone race potentially, so it has no bearing on the Grand Prix itself. So under Steiner's plan, you would have qualifying on the Friday for the Grand Prix, then qualifying for the sprint on Saturday morning, then the sprint on Saturday afternoon, or Saturday lunchtime like it is now in Brazil, and Saturday late afternoon for the sprint, and then Grand Prix on Sunday as now.
Do you think they could do it like, if anyone from F1's listening, don't listen to me because this is very off the cuff. But when you go to the arrive and drive sessions and you pay that little bit extra to get the Grand Prix package, and they let you do qualifying, and then they grid you up and you go off for your 15-minute race or whatever. Maybe they should do that. Let's have a on the car and send them off for their 25% sprint race.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is very off the cuff, so I'm sure there's some tweaks that could happen. But
I think I'm not actually against that idea from Steiner at all, because less practice is better in terms of, in my personal opinion, in terms of the sport and the unpredictability and the interest. It's not better in terms of people getting to watch Formula One cars go round and round, either at the track or on the telly or on the radio. But I don't mind that idea of this being a qualifying session for the sprint, and the sprint's just, and you could do something like different with the quali format as well. You don't do the same quali format. You do, even if you just had a 1 hour, like an old fashioned even if you just had a P2, but the fastest times, you could just have this hour, but then at some point you have soft tires at the end to do a run on. Yeah, it's interesting. It feels a bit too much like a good idea for it to happen.
Give it time. We'll find, or the teams will find a way to mess it up or have issues with it.
The other thing about the sprint weekends is they're not necessarily that popular with the sort of Formula One ardent fans, cognoscenti, whatever you want to call them. But something always happens, doesn't it? Something different always happens, it seems, in a sprint weekend somehow. Sometimes it's not directly related to the fact that it's a sprint format like Brazil last year, where Hamilton started at the back and so on. But maybe it's just fate, and that's just the way it's been. But there's now been 6 sprints, and in each one of them, there's always been some slightly oddball scenario, which isn't going to discourage Formula One wanting to do more.
Really? Interesting.
Okay, Kev, so driving straight out, please.
Cover that. For what it's worth, on a soft tyre, on a 1 minute 15.868, but he's only a tenth ahead of Carlos Sainz, who's on the medium tyre. Perez is lapping on the hards, actually, and is just coming around the final corner now, out of Junsao and up over the hill. And I think Perez might go to the top of the times here. He does indeed, on a 1 minute 15.539, so he goes 3 tenths quicker than Leclerc, but on the hard tyres, whereas Leclerc is on the softs. And Sainz is third, Bottas is fourth, Ocon is fifth, Joe, Sargent, Schumacher and Latifi are the 10 drivers to have set the lap time. In fact, Hamilton's just jumped up into second, Ocon has just jumped up into fifth, Hamilton on the hard tyres as well. Russell's actually going quicker than them both, but he's on the soft tyres. And to put a bit of context, the quickest lap time we've seen this weekend, a 1 minute...
Mode push, please. Mode push.
Copy.
We actually had quicker lap times in Q2. A 1 minute 10.881 is the quickest time of the weekend. That was set by Max Verstappen in Q2. So we are 4 seconds or so off the pace as Magnussen gets a big cheer as he comes around Decido do Lago.
And that's one of the confusing things about this session. So 4 seconds off the pace is not the pace of the start of a Grand Prix. They tend to be more like 6 to 7 seconds off, depending on how much time management they're doing. I mean, they're always time managing to some extent, but sometimes it's more. Some races it's more than others, depending on what kind of race they're trying to run. So you look at this and you think, well, 2 drivers have done lap times 3 tenths of a second apart. One of them on the softest tire, one of them on the hardest tire. How are you supposed to come to any conclusions as to what's going on?
Yeah, indeed. Russell quickest on a 15.115, then 3 tenths quicker than Perez, 6 tenths quicker than Hamilton 7/10 quicker than Leclerc, and then Sainz, Ocon, Bottas, Verstappen now up into 8th place, Joe 9th, Sargent 10th, then Schumacher and Latifi. Magnussen slots into 4th position. I'm saying that the Haas had looked all right this weekend as well for Magnussen. I think he was a yellow flag in Sector 3. That's at Junsao, and that is Nicholas Latifi going through the grass on the exit of the final corner. Manages to recover and get back on his way and back onto the circuit, but a bit of a spin there for Latifi. Junsao always used to be a corner that caught people out. Haven't seen any this weekend, haven't seen much running, admittedly, but he's now, I presume, going to return to the pit lane here. Latifi, or will he just try and clean those tyres up and go again? He'll try and clean them up and go again, so no flat spots, presumably.
No, it's very easy, especially if you get a couple of wheels wide, to just roll down the hill effectively. Let's have a look at what happened. We've got a replay here. Goes in and just locks up the inside front wheel and just pretty much goes straight.
Pace is good, Kev. Pace is good.
It falls away very steeply, doesn't it? Away from the track, so it's very difficult to slow the car down. But no harm done, it looks like, so he'll carry on, take a lap or two to clean up the tyres and get back into his long run.
So Latifi then carrying on his way, 13th quickest at the moment, and Russell is fastest, Perez is second, Hamilton third, Magnussen fourth. Yes, that's what I was going to say. The Haas was on reasonable pace, even in free practice. Magnussen didn't hook up a good lap, but I think Schumacher was 8th quickest in free practice 1. Yeah, only 4/10 off Sergio Perez. So it wasn't actually looking too bad a weekend for Haas, but obviously not quite this good, that's for sure.
So what's going to be the how do they capitalize on this? Because I think by their own admission, it's a bit of a freak result. They're going to be expecting in a normal race to slip back a little bit, but they just have to try and hang on as well as they can to get a hopefully a starting position near the top 10 for the Grand Prix itself. And if they do have a bit of pace in that car, that could be more than doable. You just make a bit of a roadblock, get the elbows out. We know that Magnussen can do it. He's a very, very accomplished racer in sort of wheel-to-wheel battles. So it could be quite an interesting little roadblock that forms.
And Haas in the championship, they're on 36 points. They're 49. They're 13 behind Aston Martin, and then it's only another 4 to Alfa Romeo. Look, it's a bit of a stretch, but the Aston Martins aren't anywhere near scoring any points. You get 8 points for the win, but if you can then be in a good place for the Grand Prix tomorrow as well, could be an opportunity for Haas. 6th in the championship feels a bit of a stretch, but you never know. If he picks up 6 points today and 6 points tomorrow, Magnussen, and Alfa Romeo and Aston Martin don't score, suddenly they're right in there going into Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, just a bit of caution on this conversation though. Haas do tend to go backwards a bit in races. Or they have a bit of a tendency to do that. Not always, but quite often they don't get their tyre management quite right. They've not got the tyres, they're not handling the tyres properly as a team, and a lot of the other teams think that that's a function of the fact that they're a small, under-resourced team that runs to a different model than everybody else. Remember, they buy every single possible part that they can under the regulations from Ferrari. And it's perhaps not a coincidence that Ferrari have struggled with tyre management this year, and so have Haas, and the cars have got quite a lot of the similar DNA. So I think, first of all, there's a straight, so that's going to, Verstappen's just going to go straight past if Magnussen's not there, I would imagine.
Nathan says, sorry to say, Kevin Magnussen will lead the sprint for about 3 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Talk of any other scenario.
Daniel, wind is different to yesterday, now comes from the right-hand side on start-finish straight, so you're picking up a 15k tailwind.
I think he'll have done a good job.
40% chance of rain for the sprint later on. Does that help or hinder? I don't know.
It doesn't look like it at the moment, does it? It's a glorious day, 25 degrees. So there's a bit of some dark cloud you can see over the favela over there, right behind the last corner. But
it's a hard question, isn't it? There are pros and cons for both if you're in Kevin's shoes, I think, because not knowing the relative pace that they might have in the wet versus the dry, assuming it's quite similar. In the dry, it can be a lot harder to pass, especially when you have to follow the car in the dirty air and you've got a lot of high-speed corners here. It's very easy to overheat the tyres, and that can be used to the defender's advantage. In the rain, especially when you're in the first 2 or 3 cars, you can actually see where you're going, which is quite nice. And it shouldn't be underestimated, especially in the early laps. You know, if there's enough standing water that there's a lot of spray coming up from the cars, and you're in 6th, 7th, 8th, you just cannot attack the circuit in the same way. You can't trust that. You know, your references aren't there. You can barely see more than 100 meters in front of you, and that's a big advantage as well, not having to deal with that.
For what it's worth, the rest of the grid for later on is Magnussen on pole, Verstappen second, then it's Russell and Norris third and fourth, Carlos Sainz in fifth, Ocon and Alonso 6th and 7th, Hamilton down in 8th, Perez 9th, and Leclerc in 10th. So, I mean, Magnussen can drop behind Verstappen for sure, but Russell, with the straight line speed in that Mercedes, is he cruising past Magnussen? Maybe not. Norris? McLaren aren't exactly rapid in a straight line, and then you're still into a sort of midfield scrap. Sainz is fifth, he's got to get through a load of people. The Alpines, I don't know if they're quick enough to fully catch up, so I don't know. I think he might be getting a wreath. He could get a wreath here, Magnussen, today. There's a...
Okay, good pace, Kev. Similar to Sainz.
Norris follows him through as they come into the Senna S, and one of the Valtteri Bottas in the Alfa Romeo had just got through past Sargent as well. So that was all very tight and close as they came into the first corner. Russell is still quickest, and he's actually improved on that last lap to do a 1 minute 14.9. So he goes almost 6/10 clear of Sergio Perez, 7/10 back to Gasly, 8/10 to Hamilton in fourth. Magnussen has dropped down to fifth, who's 9/10 back now from George Russell. Then it's Leclerc and Sainz, still running in 6th and 7th. Only driver in the pits is Esteban Ocon in the Alpine. Everybody else is still passing around. Joe's just been through the pits, but rejoined the circuit with 43 minutes and 30 seconds remaining as they drop down through the left-hander at Magulio up towards Junsao and out over the start-finish straight again. Mercedes and Hamilton, they must have been a bit disappointed with how yesterday unfolded.
Yeah, Hamilton did one of his. I mean, they only do one interview after the sprints. It's the sort of standard TV interview. No one else gets any access to the drivers. But he did one of his sort of classic interviews where he doesn't really want to answer any questions. You know he's upset. You know he's annoyed about. So it just didn't work out for him. I think he was like late out. Tires lost temperature. Then he caught some of the rain, and it just, you know, the sort of conditions you'd expect Hamilton to shine in, it just didn't work out, and he'll be even more annoyed that Russell is third and he's down in 8th, with only Perez and Leclerc who were sort of tangling with each other behind him. So not a great day for Hamilton. Actually, I think the Mercedes has been looking reasonably pacey this weekend from what we've been able to tell. So I'm interested to see how Russell gets on in the sprint, how well he can hang on to Verstappen. But you're right to point out the problem with the Mercedes straight line speed. I think that's going to make things quite difficult for Hamilton to come through.
Of course, the straight line speed is what allowed Hamilton to make that amazing comeback when we had the sprint race format last time out here, and you know, without that advantage that he had in that car, would it have been possible? Probably not. So he's going to have to rely on some different a different strategy come today's race and tomorrow as well, and it's going to be a lot harder for him. There are not many places to pass here at Interlagos, especially once you get past turn 4 and you're into the very tight and technical section that leads all the way out onto the pit straight. So only those 2 DRS zones going into turn 1 and 4, which, you know, if you haven't got the grunt, it's going to be very difficult.
There was a fun one, wasn't there? Did Button overtake Webber into turn?
We got too much troubling.
So it did Button around the outside.
Is that what it was?
It was a really good move, yeah. But I think Button might have done it a couple of years later.
Yeah. 41 minutes and 10 seconds to go. Just on that, someone tweeted in yesterday, and I forget who it was, so forgive me for not name-checking you, but they pointed out that last year Horner said anyone can drive fast in a straight line at one point because of the Mercedes straight line speed, and then obviously now here we are on the reverse of that, with Red Bull having the straight line speed advantage, which is I don't know, just I find that commentable, so I did. Norris is coming through the final corners now and up over the line. He did a good job yesterday in the McLaren, 4th quickest and continued his sort of wet dry. I think he would have sort of been the star of the show if it weren't for Magnussen.
Yeah, he did very well. And, we can't forget that he was.
Okay, Lance, we're hoping attack the exit. We're looking at a nice gap ahead of Russell, so attack the exit straight.
You're never going to be 100% for the rest of the weekend if you were ill only a few days ago. So he's clearly worked his way through that and done a stellar job yesterday. Just seeing an onboard replay on board with one of the Red Bulls, just showing his nose. It was Checo against Sargent going into turn one, and he didn't really commit. And Sargent just turned in, so it was a bit of a lock-up and a last-minute retreat from Checo to avoid a collision there.
Amit says, what about one-shot qualifying? Drivers go out in championship order and get one lap run to set your fastest time, and that's the sprint grid. Don't mind that.
I quite like the drama of that.
Yeah.
When you only have to focus on one car at a time. It's quite nice.
Yeah, I'm not against that at all.
You do have to deal with, not everyone has the same track conditions then, yes.
And flap update when you can.
Well, honestly, I'm quite happy like this, but we can go plus 80.
Sprint.
That's how the 2005 Japanese Grand Prix ended up being one of the greatest races ever.
Yeah.
Because there was mixed conditions in one lap qualifying. And you ended up with Raikkonen, Alonso and Schumacher all at the back of the grid because they got the wet weather.
And that's the thing. But even in a dry condition, if you're sending Verstappen out first and you go, it's not going to be a reverse grid, but it's going to be shuffled a bit. Like it could be in some occasions, but in a standard dry session.
In the conditions of yesterday, Verstappen would have been at the back because he would have got the rain at the end, wouldn't he? Because he would have gone out last if that's how they did qualifying.
Yeah, but I'm saying him out first.
Well, okay, why?
Because then the championship leader gets the worst track conditions, broadly speaking, in a dry session.
Yeah, true.
And so but he's not going to qualify last because he's still Verstappen, but he'll be like 6th or 7th on the grid.
Maybe. One of the things about qualifying and playing with the format is that they've played with a lot of qualifying formats over the years, and they've kind of distilled down onto this one because they think it's the best.
But I'm talking just if this were for the sprint.
But yeah.
So this one is the best because that wouldn't be fair for the Grand Prix. That wouldn't be an appropriate grid selection for the Grand Prix because I still believe you should have the best, quickest at the front, and that's fine. But I think for a sprint, oh my goodness, the front left on Leclerc's Ferrari is horrible on that sort of inside shoulder.
What you're seeing there is a little bit of graining and damage to the surface, which you can get, especially with the soft compound here. And like we've said a couple of times, you do get overheating just because you get so many corners in such a short space of time. And then he also had this thick band of rubber, which is picked right on the inside shoulder of the tire, which you can get when just running over rubber that's been thrown off from other tires, and you're not loading that tire if it's the inside wheel, for example, on a corner. And then he turned into the next corner and it all started flying off and causing a bit of a mess.
Back into the pits has come Max Verstappen. Sergio Perez in the Red Bull. And Verstappen is still out on circuit, improving on this lap, but he's on the hard tyres. Christopher says, why is Jack suggesting a thing that everyone wanted to get rid of in Formula E? Well, because in Formula E, the gaps were a lot closer, so it did turn into a full reverse grid. But I think in F1, it would just be a bit of a shuffle, and it only for the sprint race, not for the Grand Prix. The Grand Prix remains as it is. That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't want to mess with this format for the Grand Prix stuff. For the sprint races, you would consider it just because they... if the driving factor for the sprint race is entertainment and you want to move away from the purest stuff of the Grand Prix itself, then that could make it more interesting and make it work. It's a balance.
36 minutes and 7 seconds left on the clock. Verstappen, as I say, still going around. Didn't actually improve on that last lap. He was up on his previous best, but remains in 12th position. I'll give you the order for what it's worth. Russell, Perez, Gasly, Hamilton, Magnussen, the top 5. Leclerc, Sainz, Ocon, Bottas, Norris, the top 10. Alonso, Verstappen, Ricciardo, Zhou and Stroll, the top 15. And then Vettel, Tsunoda, Sargent, Schumacher and Latifi, the 20 drivers. A very quick yellow flag a couple of moments ago. We think that might have been potentially up at turn 4, but we'll wait and see if we get a replay. But it was a very, very brief one. If anything did happen, no one appears to have missed any timing beams, so we'll see if anything dramatic happens.
So most people complaining of rear deg on this medium, rear deg.
And now Max Verstappen, as he returns to the pit lane, having done a run of, well, he's done a 13-lap stint on these hard tyres, but they're the same hard tyres that he ran yesterday. So, and the same for Perez. They've done 24 laps now on those hard tyres in total, which is quite interesting.
They'll just be trying to get a bit of a wear profile from those tyres, because that helps when they see how those tyres are wearing, because they can measure the rubber tread that's left on the tyre. The strategists in the team can plug that information into their models and extrapolate out how long the tyre is going to last for the Grand Prix. It's really, really important information.